You know, in the world of cybersecurity, our digital defenses are just drowning in data. It's this constant, overwhelming flood of information. So the big question is, how on earth do they find the one real threat hidden inside all that noise? Well, that's the core challenge we're going to unpack today.
Think about it like this. Is your digital security guard actually watching for intruders? Or are they just constantly getting distracted, chasing shadows and leaves blowing in the wind? This is the fundamental problem that our automated defense systems are wrestling with every single second of every single day.
And that guard we're talking about, that's what we call an IDPS, or an Intrusion Detection and Prevention system. Its whole job is to watch everything, and I mean everything, happening on a network. It can either just sound the alarm, that's the detection part, or it can actively step in and block the threat, which is the prevention part. But as you're about to see, that job is anything but simple.
All right, so here's what we're diving into. We're going to start with what I call the Detectors Dilemma, this fundamental trade-off that every system has to make. Then, we'll get into the whole crying wolf problem of false positives, followed by something even scarier, the silent threats of false negatives. After that, we'll look at the cat-and-mouse game of evasion, and finally, we'll open up the Defenders Playbook to see how we can actually fight back. Okay, first up, the Detectors Dilemma. See, at the very heart of every single IDPS, there's this built-in conflict, a constant trade-off that security pros are always trying to manage.
It really is a balancing act. On the one hand, if you tune your system to be super sensitive, yeah, you'll probably catch more threats. But you're also going to create a mountain of false alarms, what we call false positives. But on the other hand, if you tune it down to reduce all that noise, you run the risk of missing a real attack, a false negative, and that creates this dangerous false sense of security.
So when you're faced with that choice, most organizations make a pretty clear decision. They'd much rather deal with too many alerts than risk missing a single real threat. They choose to lower the number of false negatives, even if it means their security teams are stuck manually sifting through tons of false positives. It's the classic better safe than sorry strategy, right?
So let's take a closer look at that first problem, the false positives. This is when the system is just constantly crying wolf, where totally normal everyday activity somehow ends up looking malicious.
So what is a false positive exactly? It's basically an alert that incorrectly flags harmless activity as an attack. Your system starts flashing red, but when your team goes to investigate, there's nothing actually wrong. It's a false alarm.
And what causes these things? Well, it's usually not a bug in the system. It can be something as simple as someone using a new app for the first time or a server going down for maintenance. In a really dynamic, complex network, things are changing all the time, and the system just hasn't learned it all yet. So if you set that detection threshold just a little too low, perfectly normal behavior can end up triggering an alarm.
You know, the perfect analogy for a false positive is a smoke detector that goes off every single time you make toast. It's not a fire, but man, is it loud and annoying. And after a while, you just start to ignore it. And that draining of your attention, that's the real danger here.
And the impact is huge, absolutely massive. When false positives get out of control, security analysts can spend the vast majority of their day just chasing ghosts. This leads to something called alert fatigue. The team becomes so numb to the warnings that they're way more likely to miss the one alert that actually matters.
Okay, now let's flip this coin over and look at the other side of the dilemma, the silent threats. This isn't about too much noise anymore. This is about that terrifying silence when you know something malicious is happening and your system sees absolutely nothing. A false negative is quite simply a complete failure of detection. A real attack is happening right now, but the IDPS completely misses it. It just lets the intruder walk right in and operate completely undetected. So why do these even happen? Well, there are a bunch of reasons. The attack could be brand new, a zero-day threat that nobody has a signature for yet. Or a really clever attacker might disguise their activity so it just blends in with all the normal traffic. Encryption is also a huge blind spot for these systems, and sometimes an attack can be so slow and so subtle that it never even trips the system's alarms. So if a false positive is like a faulty smoke detector, a false negative is like a burglar who expertly disables your entire alarm system before they even think about picking the lock. You're sitting there thinking you're safe because you don't hear an alarm. But that silence is the danger.
Now here's where it gets interesting. Sometimes these failures aren't just accidents or, system limitations. They're the direct result of a smart, active adversary who is playing a game of hide and seek with your defenses. This is the evasion game.
Evasion is when an attacker knowingly crafts an attack specifically to slip past a security system. They know the IDPS is there watching, so they change their methods to become invisible to it, all without changing the attack's ultimate malicious goal.
So how do they pull this off? Well, they can disguise their attack, maybe by encoding it in a way the IDPS can't read, but the target system can. They can slowly attack way down, spreading it out over hours or even days to stay under the radar. Or they just find a blind spot, like using encrypted channels where the IDPS can't see what's inside the traffic.
Okay, so I know this all might sound a little bleak. We've got noisy alarms, we've got silent intruders, and we've got attackers who are actively trying to hide. So, how do we fight back? Well, let's open up the Defenders Playbook. This playbook has 4 key strategies. First is constant tuning and customization. This is all about teaching the system what's normal for your specific network. Second, you have to use combined detection methods. Relying on just one technique is a recipe for disaster. Third, and this one is absolutely critical, is multi-layered security. You need different tools watching different things to cover each other's blind spots. And finally, there's strategic placement, putting your sensors in places where attackers have nowhere to hide, like before the traffic gets encrypted.
That multi-layered approach is really the whole ballgame. The guiding principle here is simple. No single tool can ever see the whole picture. It's just not possible. But by combining, say, a network IDPS with a host-based one, you can see both the traffic flowing between computers and what's happening on the computers themselves. This kind of cross-validation helps you spot real threats with way more confidence and filter out all that noise.
So at the end of the day, the biggest takeaway is this. Cybersecurity isn't something you can just buy off a shelf and install. It's not a product, it is a process. It demands constant tuning, constant learning, and constant adaptation, because both your environment and the attackers, they are always changing. And that really leaves us with one final big question to think about. This cat and mouse game, it never, ever ends. As attackers get smarter and invent new ways to hide, the challenge for us is to figure out how our defenses have to evolve, not just to keep up, but to somehow stay one step ahead.